Hello and welcome. This podcast is going to be discussing the issue of the underrepresentation of women in primarily feminine issues in medical research and clinical trials, and how this issue has led women to have difficulties receiving diagnosis or proper treatment for their ailments. This problem has existed for centuries, and though some progress has been made in recent years, there is still a lot of progress that needs to be made to achieve equal treatment for men and women in the medical field. Some examples of situations in which women have been underrepresented in research include trials for cardiovascular disease, psychiatric problems, and cancer. There are many studies illuminating the statistics behind many medical research projects in which there were fewer female patients included in trials, despite the fact that the disease affects more women than men. There have been many excuses for this, such as the claim that women and men were assumed to react the same to disease and treatment, or that female patients came with more possible side effects and could therefore skew the data. In general, the biggest problem seems to be a lack of departments in the National Institute of Health, or NIH, dedicated to researching women's issues, and a reluctance to appoint female principal investigators for medical research projects. If you would like a more detailed analysis on this issue, it can be found in the research essay linked below. Hopefully you weren't lost in that overview, because now we can move on to the main topic of the podcast, the effects that this issue has had on women trying to receive treatment for their ailments. A huge consequence of this disparity in research has been that medical professionals do not know the differences between how women and men may show symptoms for the same disease, and they cannot recognize those symptoms when women come in with a problem. Perhaps even worse is that problems that primarily burden women have been so under-researched and underfunded that it has become very difficult for women to find a doctor who can give them treatment to improve their quality of life, a doctor who will really listen to what they have to say, or a doctor who can recognize a serious issue like endometriosis before it's too late. This podcast is titled Hysterical to acknowledge the many women who have been turned away from doctors due to supposed hysteria over quote-unquote minor or even non-existent symptoms, which has in turn led to their disease or problem worsening without treatment. As some may know, the word hysterical is rooted in the Greek word hystera, meaning womb, and is commonly applied to women who are, in reality, upset over something that could legitimately have a massively negative impact on their lives or the lives of others. In theory, this podcast will have many episodes where we can hear stories from different women about the challenges they've faced in the health industry. One common issue that almost every woman experiences is going through menopause, and yet almost no research has been done in this area. It is very difficult for a woman to find treatment that will help them feel like themselves again, and there are so many women out there who feel alone in their struggle to regain the life they had before menopause. As a 19-year-old, I personally cannot attest to the struggles many women have had to go through. However, my mother has been fighting this battle for a few years now and has kindly agreed to share her story with us today. Hello.
Hello.
To start off, I think it's important we get an idea about you as a person so that listeners can really understand that this kind of thing will happen to any woman, no matter their background. Do you mind sharing like your name, age, where you're from, what you do?
Sure. My name is Crissy Lippman. I am 48 years old and I live in North Andover, Massachusetts. Right now, I am the executive director of a small nonprofit in the Merrimack Valley called Community Giving Tree. And my entire life, I have been an athlete, a runner, and a generally healthy person, somebody who eats well and takes care of myself.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I've prepared a few questions so we can really get a good understanding of your experience, how it's affected you, and what other women might be able to do to help their own situations.
Sure.
Cute. Okay. Um, Question one. Have you experienced negligence from doctors when you go to them with pain or problems, and what was this pain that you were experiencing?
Yes, that's happened to me many, many times in my life, both for myself and when I've presented problems for my two children, you and your brother. Um, some specific issues that I've had have been an abdominal pain that has, had brief testing, and then the doctors have told me everything is fine and sent me on my way. Um, I would say 90% of the time that I present at the doctor's office with a complaint, I am brushed off and told that it's not a big deal.
Yeah, that's awful. How were you treated by the doctors? What did they tell you? Um, I've like throughout my research and writing my research essay on this problem, I encountered a lot of stories from women who have like experienced a lot of condescension from doctors who were like, everything's fine, you're okay. Like, did you experience that?
Absolutely. And especially going through this menopause journey, a lot of the symptoms that women who are going through menopause present with are things like exhaustion and brain fog and depression and anxiety. And those are a lot of symptoms that are similar to, symptoms of other illnesses or just having anxiety or depression. And we're often brushed off, and I was several times by doctors saying, well, you have two kids, you have a job, you have a busy life. Of course you're exhausted. Or it's normal to lose words in the middle of a sentence and not be able to remember what you were going to say. Um, and what the doctors tended to not understand, and they were really brushing off, wasn't that just these things were happening, but the severity of the way that they were happening. You know, not being able to remember a word in a sentence 5 times in one conversation is very frustrating, especially when you're an intelligent human who's used to being able to have a conversation without losing what you're trying to say or losing the ability to come up with words, or having anxiety or such terrible exhaustion that I would have day after day after day where I would be driving my kids to their afternoon activities and thinking to myself, I actually shouldn't be driving right now because I'm so exhausted. And these just weren't normal ways to be living. So having a doctor tell you that's normal, they will say that's normal at your age. Um, and maybe it is typical, but it doesn't have to be normal.
True. Um, Another thing that I found a lot on this research journey were stories from a lot of women who were given treatment from doctors, but that like they were like, this will help you, you'll be okay, this is the right thing to do, and then it either didn't have any effect because they weren't treating them for the right thing, or it had negative effects either because they were trying to treat something that they didn't have, or because that what they did really have was not getting treated and was only getting worse. Um, did you ever experience like doctors who assured you that you should have some kind of treatment and in reality it had negative effects or no effect?
Yes. Early in my menopause journey, and for those who don't know, perimenopause, which is the period that you go through before you actually reach menopause, lasts on average 10 years for women. And then once you go through menopause, which is actually when your period ends, that part, that once you're in that phase, that's menopause. So early in my perimenopause period, when I was really feeling, horrible all the time and starting to get the brain fog and the anxiety, I went to see an endocrinologist who tested my thyroid and told me that even though my numbers were okay, he was certain that I had hypothyroidism and that treating me for hypothyroidism would make me feel better. So he prescribed a synthetic hormone to treat my thyroid. And I took it for a year and I never felt worse than I did that year. And so I finally, a year later, went back to his office, but he had left or retired. He was gone. And I saw another doctor in the practice, and she looked at my numbers and she said, nobody with numbers like mine should ever be on medication for hypothyroidism. And so she took me off, and then I felt better than I had during that terrible year. Not back to normal, but better than when I was taking those hormones.
Did you like experience any consequences from waiting so long to retrieve treat well, first of all, did you end up eventually finding treatment that has helped you on this journey?
Yes. Finally, just in January, I was able to find a doctor who would treat me with hormone replacement therapy. Prior to that, I saw easily 5 different doctors who I would express my situation to. I would tell them I'm gaining so much weight despite not changing my diet and still exercising. I am constantly getting injured. I can't run anymore at all. I'm exhausted. I have the worst brain fog. I can't think of anything ever. And they would all just tell me this is normal, or try changing your diet. You should try fasting. Or instead of running, why don't you try rowing? But none of them were hearing that the person that I was before was being buried by all of these horrible symptoms. And I had tried so many of these things. I'm a healthy person. I like to exercise. So it wasn't that I was lazy or that I was just eating too much junk food. Something was happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, in January, I found a doctor who I sat down with, and she went through my history of what's been going on for about 45 minutes. And at the end of our interview, she said to me, um, what do I need to say to you to convince you to try hormone replacement therapy? And I said, you don't have to say anything except here's the prescription.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was ready at that point. I would have tried anything. If you told me that standing on my head for an hour a day would make me feel better, I would stand on my head for an hour a day. It was just at a point of true frustration. So she started me on hormone replacement therapy in January. And actually, what happened was at first I started to feel a little bit worse. Um, it felt like I was going backwards through time and experiencing some symptoms that I had had in the past that had stopped. And I panicked a little bit and I called her and I said, oh no, wait, I think maybe this is a mistake. And she assured me that if I just gave it 3 months, that I would start to feel better. And in the last 3 months, I have been able to very slowly lose some of the weight around my belly. That is a specific weight that women gain when they go through menopause. It's visceral fat that is affected by hormones, and it's not as easily changed as, the calories in, calories out, or just exercise more. It's very stubborn and it likes to stay there, and it's because of our
Mm-hmm.
hormones. Um, I have had less anxiety. I've had less depression. I tend to sort of put my depression on a scale of like, if I get in the car and I feel like singing along to the music, then I'm okay. And sometimes I go through these periods of time where no, like music doesn't make me happy. And then I know that things are getting bad. So I have started feeling a lot better,
That's
and it's
good.
been, yeah. So yeah, it's been great to actually start feeling better.
So glad you're able to find somebody who could actually prescribe you something helpful.
Yeah.
Um, did you experience like any long-term or just in the moment consequences from waiting for so long to receive treatment? And like, did this lead to any further complications? Your daily life impacted? Um, or have you pretty much bounced back from that now that you have proper treatment?
Um, I lost years of my life. I mean, that, and it might sound like a dramatic thing to say, but I lost who I was for years. And, I wasn't able to do the things that I enjoyed doing. I didn't enjoy my friends and my family the way that I had had for so many years. I didn't feel well. I suffer from migraines, and my migraines were so much worse, and nobody had answers for me. My normal treatments weren't touching them. Um, my joints hurt. I spent so much time being injured, going to physical therapy for one injury after another because I had so much inflammation, which is another thing that happens to women when they go through menopause. But to your whole point about this, none of this is studied. So doctors don't
Mm-hmm.
know. So when you go to the doctor and you say, my hands hurt or my joints hurt, they say, oh, well, you probably are starting to get arthritis. Maybe you should start taking some Advil every day and see if that helps. But it doesn't have to be that way. And, 20 years ago, a study was done about hormone replacement therapy that said that women who took estrogen, synthetic estrogen, had a higher rate of breast cancer. And so anybody who had breast cancer in their family should not take estrogen. And that one study turned everybody off of hormone replacement therapy because all women are terrified of getting breast cancer. Even if we don't have a history of it in our family, we know enough women around us who have had it, women who have died from it. Nobody wanted to mess around with that. But that study was actually very quickly discredited, but it stuck. And doctors followed it. It was like they heard that study. It was published in all the magazines and all the journals, and that just stuck. So when my own mother was going through menopause, she didn't use, well, actually, she started using hormone replacement therapy and stopped because of that study, because her mother had had breast cancer.
Mm.
And so all of these women before us suffered and struggled, and it became the norm. So when my generation of women started coming through and we were saying, you know, we're tired all the time, we feel awful, we don't enjoy life anymore, the doctors were just saying to us, that's just what this age is. That's just normal for your age. And
Yeah.
so when some doctors finally started paying attention to the very small number of studies that were being done on hormone replacement therapy and seeing that not only were they harmful, but that when you start hormone replacement therapy, it reduces inflammation in your body, which reduces the pain in your body. Your joints don't hurt anymore. It actually reduces your risk of other illnesses like hypertension and heart attacks and things like that. But somebody needs to start paying attention to it more than just one or two doctors here and there. It can't be that you have to go see 5 doctors. If you look at message boards of women my age, there are multiple messages of women saying, lead me to a doctor in this area that will treat me for my perimenopause symptoms, that will take me seriously.
Yeah. And that's one of the goals I have with this podcast and with my research. I'm really hoping that like this message, can not only get out to people who can like make a change, give more funding to those studies that will research these problems more and put more effort into finding treatments for it, but also that it will reach other women who have gone through these same things or will go through these same things. Um, and they can realize like they're not alone. There are so many women who are also going through this, who can provide support, provide recommendations for doctors who have been properly educated on these symptoms and these treatments. So,
It's so important because it's such a lonely feeling to feel just terrible all the time and look outside and it's like this for everybody. Anytime you feel depressed or anxious or sick or sad in any way, when you look out at the rest of the world, everybody looks so normal and
mm-hmm.
they look like they're doing all of the things and they're not struggling, and you feel like you're the only one who's struggling. So having a network of other women who are going through it and having them say, I feel that way too. I feel horrible all the time too,
Yeah.
or the one thing women say going through menopause all the time, and it's a terrible thing to say, but we always say, I hate my family too. And it's not that we hate our family, but we just feel so impatient with everybody. We have no patience for anything that's happening around us. So, of course, it's magnified when you're at home with your kids or your husband and they're annoying you in whatever way. And it's terrible. It's a terrible way to feel. But knowing that
Yeah.
other women are going through it is helpful. And then having other women offer resources of ways that you can feel better is magical.
You kind of covered this last question, but is there anything that you've learned from your experience, or do you have a message for other women who may be experiencing this situation just from what you've learned?
Yes, I mean, I have specific resources that I would recommend women check out. There's specifically one OBGYN out of Texas who has turned her whole practice into studying and treating menopause, and she's written books. Her name is Dr. Mary Claire Haver, and she has been a huge proponent for women who, just want to feel better and protect themselves against, future illnesses. And because so many of the things that we go through, with our hormones going all over the place when we go through menopause, it can put us at higher risk for other diseases as we age, including things like dementia and bone frailty and things like that. And, we are different than the women who were in our generation a generation or two ago. Those women were becoming grandmothers and, starting to sit in rocking chairs and knit. And this generation of women my age right now, we are all still very active, want to be very active until late into our lives. So having the right treatment and, taking care of ourselves in the right way can save us from so many future problems as well. So
Yeah.
I would say to anybody who is starting to go through this that it is not normal and that there are ways to feel better and that they should not stop until they find a doctor who is willing to treat them.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining me and talking with me today and sharing your perspective. Um, I think it will really help any woman who listens to know that they aren't alone. There's hope for improvement, despite barriers they may face, but they'll know that it's possible.
Absolutely. And thank you for shining a light on this because it's really, really important that people in your generation know about this now so that they can do more to study it and research it. And when you get to be our age, you don't have to suffer the way that we did.
Yes. To our listeners, this has been just one story from one woman, but there are thousands of women out there who have gone through similar experiences, some much more extreme than this one. There are stories of women who had endometriosis or cancers that just weren't detected because doctors didn't know the symptoms to look for, and it progressed and got much worse and caused problems for them for the rest of their life, and it's terrible to hear about. um there are some steps that can be taken to make progress. With our current political climate, we're moving backwards. The NIH is receiving less funding, and they need more funding so that they can dedicate more money to the research that will focus on women. Um, Also, research companies need to hire more women as principal investigators on research projects. Clinical trials need to include at least an equal number of male and female patients if women are as burdened by the disease as men are. There are many steps that can be taken, and in order for that to happen, this issue needs to be brought to public attention. Um, as I said, it's my hope that with this podcast, more people will recognize the importance of this issue and join us in our mission to spread awareness and make a positive change. Even if it can't be at a federal level, it's my hope that any woman who hears this will know that she isn't alone when she inevitably encounters a situation similar to this one, and there is hope for treatment. So, thank you for listening.